Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and you're listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rui Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nico Ladero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! They're gone! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Nice work on your little yacht thing.
And Portland can't say shit.
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder at Heart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open seriously.
Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes on the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network. I am Jeremiah O'Shan, and joining me back in the saddle, Matt Doyle, the MLS Armchair Analyst. We're going to talk Western Conference. Thank you for joining me, Matt.
This is neither a saddle nor an armchair. This is a fake Ames chair. You know, familiar with the Ames chair?
Yeah. I am vaguely familiar with it. That's a nice chair.
Well, it's a fake one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's a type of thing that Don Draper had in his apartment in season 5, 6 of Mad Men. It was my wife's decision back during COVID. We were drinking a little bit. Yeah. I was like, I'm not going to stand in the way of this one. This could work for me. But the Ames chair analyst never really took off, though. No,
a real shame that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Did you happen to? I'm going to put you on the spot. Did you happen to listen? Joe Lowry filled in for you last time we did this show.
I did not listen to that. I get a lot of Joe Lowry in my life.
Yeah.
You know, I like between, I check Backheeled pretty religiously. And then, every now and again, I listen to him on Total Soccer Show. And then I've wound up in like several different Discords where Joe is a somewhat active member. So like I get a daily dose of Joe Lowry. But Lowry and O'Shan together is a good little group right there.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. But, we're happy to have you back in any case.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, I'm the original. Joe's the cover band. That's fine.
That's how it is. That's his lot in life. Well, let's dig into this. There was big news in the Western Conference today. We may as well just open up right out of the gates with the news that Peter Vermes was fired by Sporting Kansas City. As bad as they've been, I guess it's been like 200 days since they've won a match. They had gone 0-12-1, 1 point in 13 games dating back to last season across all competitions. You would think, clearly this is a guy who's on his last legs, but he had gone through runs like this before and survived and come out of it. But this time the axe fell. What made it different this time, do you think?
They had just spent $9 million in the winter transfer window. I think that's probably the biggest difference between now and a couple of years ago. They had a really terrible, or maybe it was 4 years ago, they had a really terrible year, but they were able to say, well, the one big signing we made was Polito and he got hurt and we didn't get reinforcements, and Gary Kinda had I think he had compartment syndrome. And so there was like a laundry list of I think, viable excuses that season. This season, they were bad last year. They said we have a 3-window rebuilding project. In the first of those windows, which was a summer window, their only big addition was the Spanish fullback, Joaquin Fernandez, who's barely played. And then this window, they went out and they bought Manu Garcia, the number 10, who's been pretty bad. They brought in a winger as well, which was a position I don't think that they particularly needed to fill. And now they have this guy who hasn't done anything, who is taking minutes away from Stephen Afrifa, who was one of the few bright spots last year. And then they went out and they spent $4 million on Dejan Joveljic, who's a good player, but I'm not sure he's actually better than Willie Agata.
Right.
And none of what they did there obviously fixed the defense or fixed the midfield. In fact, I think the midfield has looked a little bit worse, though I have hopes with Jake Davis now playing in midfield that they could get better. But it just, like, it was bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, especially in these last two transfer windows. But it's been honestly, it's been a long decade of that. And I wrote a column about it. It's up on MLSsoccer.com now about how what made Vermes so great 15 years ago was his ability to identify and develop primarily domestic talent acquired via the Super Draft. His Super Draft run from 2007 to 2012 was the best 6-year run in Super Draft history. Beasler, Zusi, Espinoza, Chance Myers, Dom Dwyer, CJ Sapong, Teal Bunbury, Michael Harrington, everybody forgets about him. He played 170 games for that club, and he was very good. And then they picked up guys like Seth Sinovic and
Kai Kamara,
Tim Melia, Kai Kamara, Benny Feilhaber, guys off the scrap heap, and he got them to play together, and he got them to play really well. And they kept doing that. Later on, it was Ike Opara who maybe the best 3-year run of any center back ever. And for some reason around 2015, just completely lost interest in the Super Draft, mostly lost interest in domestic products. And the signings have been pretty terrible, one hit for every 5 misses type of thing since then. And kind of this downward spiral ended the way it was kind of destined to end once he lost his ability or interest in developing talent.
And so the thing that I find really interesting about this is that they are still sort of in the friends of Peter Vermes business, frankly. Like the organization is so deeply built around his vision of what this was. I don't know. I assume Mike Burns is not the guy who actually called him up and fired him, but it's kind of weird. Because Mike Burns was effectively hired by Peter Vermes to sort of help with some of this jobs. With I think a lot of us were raising red flags, like, why are you bringing in one of your buddies to do the stuff that he's been bad at before? And then that was to replace Gavin Wilkinson, who was another head scratching hire, even independent of all the drama around him. It was, this was Sporting Kansas City primarily has been in the Peter Vermes business for the better part of his entire tenure. Let's not forget, Peter Vermes hired himself to be the head coach almost 16 years ago. This is an organization that was defined by one person more than any other organization in MLS is defined by one person. And so I'm sitting here from the outside going, like, does this even start to address? I guess it starts to address it, but there's a lot to unfurl here.
Yeah, like the folks who I know who are more familiar with the day-to-day workings of that club than I am said that, like, Vermes had his hand on everything, down to like having to sign off on the hiring of like front desk attendants at the training center. Like, he was that micromanagey, that involved in stuff that a coach and chief soccer officer really shouldn't have to be doing. Like, that should not be his remit.
Shouldn't be allowed to do.
Shouldn't be allowed. So my sympathy here is that, like, it was barely a professional soccer team before Peter Vermes. Like, he had to institute this level of professionalism. And once you have that kind of power, then it's tough to let it go, I think, for anybody in any business. And guys who are as competitive as professional athletes, I think especially, probably struggle with that. So around 2012, 2013, he probably, instead of saying, okay, I can let the rope go a little bit and let the business side run the business side, and I'll be the soccer side, and maybe I'll get some better scouts in, or, expand the network a little bit. He started even more so having a concentration of power in his own hands, as this team essentially grew into $1 billion business. And that's what MLS teams are now. And it was too much very clearly by about 2017, 2018 or so. And it took too long for ownership to sort of rein him in or cut him off, as it were. And now I think it's going to take 18 months at least to unwind.
Maybe.
Yeah, right. to unwind all of this. It's pretty wild. It shouldn't overshadow what he did though as a whole.
Well,
There's never been a Sporting Kansas City without Peter Vermes, and there's barely been a Kansas City Wizards without Peter Vermes. And he brought this team kicking and screaming into the modern era. And just from a tactical perspective, I think he might be the single most important coach in MLS history.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was having some fun with this last night. I don't remember what the news was last night because the supporters put out a letter basically demanding that he be fired. And on some level, I feel like it's funny. Like, I'm having fun with it. One of the things I pointed out was on the Onside series. One of the kind of more interesting little anecdotes is that they did this little vignette on him, and they show him getting up at the crack of dawn and showing up to the office in the cover of night to just work extra hours and be one of the worst teams in the league. Just did strike me as kind of funny. But I also feel for the guy a little bit because he's not an unintelligent person. He clearly, I think he actually does have some ability to self-analyze himself. He doesn't seem like a jerk, and it's like you have fun with him because he's complaining to the refs or whatever. And these are always the coaches that other fans love to sort of hate on. But I do feel like ownership at some point owed it to him to step in and say, you can't do this. This is not a modern, we're not running a mom and pop shop anymore. This is supposed to be a modern sporting organization. And as much as we appreciate that you maybe want to be, you have your hands in everything, we just don't think it's good for you. And no one was there willing to save him from himself, I think. And that's what I think is too bad, because they gave him a contract, something like a 5-year contract extension 2 years ago. They've got 3 more years of Peter Vermes contracts to pay off, which is just unfathomable to me. I mean, no one in MLS has coaches don't sign 5-year contracts in MLS. And this is a guy who is in the middle of a bad run, who got an almost unbelievable extension. It's hard for me to comprehend how bad, like ownership needs to own this.
Yeah, no, you've hit the nail on the head here, right? Like it was a situation where ownership needed to create all of like different silos or different buckets of responsibility within the org because it wasn't a mom and pop shop anymore. They didn't do it, and Vermes did what. Again, he was able to sort of coalesce power in his own hands. And the other point that you made that's a good one, the Vermes that people saw on the sideline every week, that's not the Peter Vermes I knew. Now, granted, I don't know him particularly well. I've only interviewed him a few times, but every time I did, he was thoughtful. He was almost gentle with how he would approach things. I think he's aware of how intimidating he can be. He seems like a really good guy. And I know that there are plenty of players who played for him and will tell you, like, he wasn't the best guy. He was actually kind of a son of a bitch. But I think that's true of a lot of coaches. But this is not someone who folks around the league were rooting for his demise. I understand why fans would. I really do, because he has that kind of a bad guy air when he's on the sidelines. But
he's got the flat top.
Yeah, like he looks like a cop, man.
Yeah,
that's not the Vermes that I think most folks around the league got to know. And I hope that a year from now, let this guy decompress 18 months from now, hopefully he's back in a job somewhere, because I think on the whole, he was really, really good for MLS over the course of his 30 years now in the league.
Yeah, I think honestly, the way once it actually happened, I started feeling a lot more sympathy for him and a lot more frustration on behalf of Kansas City fans at the ownership that sort of allowed this whole situation to go the way it went, because it just was like there was no one there to tell him no. There was no guardrails. He was just sort of like doing the best that he could. And it kind of sucks that he felt like he had to show up to work at 6 a.m. and probably stay till 6 or 7 p.m. and just grind away doing
no guardrails and no scouting network. And that's the big thing. Like at some point, 3 months after you signed Johan Cruyff to a DP deal, somebody in the organization needs to be able to go, we blew this so badly. We need to examine our processes. And that never happened. I don't think it ever happened. And now it's on Mike Burns to fix this. Like this is the part that is going to take.
I laugh because it's funny.
It's going to take a while. Like if I was a CSO of an MLS team, I would be calling up Sporting Kansas City, asking about every half decent player on their team, because they seem ripe for the fleecing at this point.
Yeah. Well, moving into the other big sort of news, and as this is a not really a Sounders show, but we are a Sounders show at the same time. The other big news today was Ryan Kent, who I will freely admit is not a player who I had any familiarity with up until a couple weeks ago. And then all of a sudden, it's like everyone who ever played Football Manager is like, oh no, or they played FIFA is like, no, Ryan Kent is like the guy that you always end up, pursuing. So I don't know much. Do you know much about Ryan Kent? Of course, the Sounders made this signing official today. I don't know if you have anything to say about him at all, but I will admit I knew nothing about this guy before I started researching him 2 weeks ago.
I don't play FIFA or Football Manager, and I do not watch the Scottish Premier League, so I don't know much about Ryan Kent at all, other than it sounds like he has a made up name.
Yeah, it does kind of sound that way. So, we're going to have plenty of Ryan Kent discourse on this network. So we're going to just go ahead and move beyond that and then focus on the other, what I think big story of the Western Conference is, who also happens to be playing the Sounders this week. So it dovetails very nicely. And that's San Diego FC, who scored another really nice win this week. And as much as I was skeptical of what they were selling early in the preseason and going into this year and talking about how they were going to stick to their principles and all these things that every expansion team says and very few of them are ever actually able to do, they are doing it. They are walking the walk, and they are, getting results in not just kind of grinding it out either. They're looking pretty impressive right now.
I don't know. I kind of want you to eat shit a little bit more on this, because I remember a couple of weeks ago I had them 7th in my power rankings,
and I thought it was too high.
And you were on social media chirping away like a little. I'm not going to use any more foul language here, but come on, man. No, they've played good.
What else can I eat shit on as far as this goes? Every assumption I think I made about this team has so far proven incorrect. Is that fair?
You know what? Me too, though. Like even after being there for part of preseason and talking to Tyler Heaps and Mikey Veras, and they were doing the whole possessions in our DNA. We're gonna have the ball. We don't want to do aerial duels. I was like, yeah, everybody says this. Come on,
right.
Like you're gonna be no wins, 3 losses, 2 scoreless draws through 5 games, and you're gonna be like, we need to bunker. We need to bunker and counter our way to a 1-0 win, because that's the only way we're gonna do it. And it hasn't been like that in almost any way, even without Chucky Lozano for most of the season. Like they've played really good ball after he picked up that injury. Anders Dreyer has been excellent on that right wing. The whole midfield has been just superb. Shverkov, the D-mid, he's like a Kyle Beckerman regen. Like he just does the same things that Beckerman did at such a high level for like 15 years. And then that gives the whole thing function and form on both sides of the ball. Like you can crack them open. We saw Columbus do it. We saw LAFC do it on one of their goals. But for the most part, they're able to make the game compact. They're really disciplined about how and where they get pressure to the ball. And then in attack, they have a lot of good guys who are good technically, and then guys who are unselfish in their movement. And so it's all freaking working.
Yeah, so a 3-2 win this week against LAFC. They are 2-0 against their Southern California rivals. I don't think anyone, even you,
Correct,
wouldn't have predicted a 2-0 record against the two other Southern California teams. Is there any reason really at this point? Now, granted, it's 6 games, a lot can change, but are you seeing any red flags that are saying, okay, well, sure, they're doing it now, but St. Louis was in a similar position a couple years ago, and everyone was raising red flags like this is just totally unsustainable. It doesn't seem that way with San Diego.
No,
right?
It doesn't, right? Because like St. Louis was getting gifts left and right. Everybody remembers those back passes, and Roman Berkey was standing on his head. And to be fair to him, he continued to do so for 2 more years. And rescuing points like that was unsustainable. Nobody's rescuing points for San Diego. Like, they're controlling games out there with the ball. And, we saw last week when they lost to Austin, they can sometimes get a little bit, maybe a little bit gappy defensively, which allows you to counter on them. If they're not tight with those lines, then second balls can be a problem. And maybe as the weather gets hotter, then your legs get heavier and it becomes a little harder to stay as compact. Like, that is, it's not like a red flag, but I think it's something to be aware of. The rest of it all tracks. Like, even as they've had to play without a true center forward with Marcus Ingvartsen hurt, like they've gone to Oni Valakari as kind of a false 9. That gave LAFC so many problems because they didn't know how to account for his movement. And as Valakari was dropping in, Dreyer in particular, and then Mighton on the other side, they were running the channels, and like, it looked natural. It looked really well drilled. And teams that are well drilled and are willing to run for each other tend to have a lot of success in this league. And even when it's not simple running like a counterattacking team, like look at the Crew, look at that great NYCFC team that won MLS Cup a few years back. That team ran a lot in possession. And that's what San Diego are reminding me of these days.
Is there any reason the Sounders should be confident going down to San Diego, or is this a sort of survival situation? I still don't think the Sounders have looked bad in these first 6 games. The results haven't really been there, but I don't know. I was very encouraged by a lot of what I saw against San Jose. They had their best expected goal performance. They had a bunch of high quality chances. They didn't find the back of the net as much as I think it felt like they deserved to, but there were some positives in that. And one of them, I don't know where you fall on this, but this has been a lot of the debate around the Sounders this week did Danny Musovski have a blinder of a bad game, or was he actually good? I'm of the mind that he did more good than bad, but I don't know where do you fall on what do you do about the number 9 situation for the Sounders?
Yeah, I was hoping for your opinion on this because I really like Jesus Ferreira as a player. I'm not a false 9 guy. Even 3 minutes after complimenting Oni Valakari, I just tend to think that teams function better with a true number 9 out there. And to me, that's what I saw from the Sounders. The difference between that first half and the second half was Musovski. Yeah, he's not a starting caliber player in MLS really, but he mimics a lot of what Jordan Morris brings as a center forward. And that, that opens up the pockets for guys like Rusnak and Ferreira and, when De La Vega is back. So that's one. And 2 is to bring it back. I think the Sounders are talented enough, even as they're struggling to pick up results. They're talented enough to go into any game with confidence. Like, this is MLS. Nobody, nobody out there is 2009 Barcelona. So it's like they should not go down to this game expecting anything except a win.
Yeah. So I'll give my opinion on Musovski. I agree with you. I really wanted Jesus Ferreira to work out and to be sort of like
and he might still.
And he's still right. And I actually think if you watch that game, he actually was. It's funny how much better he was in the second half when there was a real 9 and he was sort of allowed to sort of float out into the wings and get into those half spaces. He still has all the on the ball skills that you expected. He sees passes that, like, his pass that sets up the goal is actually a really nice ball into Christian Roldan. He does a lot of good things, but for whatever reason, he's just not doing them when he's playing up top. And he was almost invisible in the first half in that game. And I think part of it is that the Sounders just really are not built around a team that has a false 9, because they need someone who's just going to, like, stay high and stretch the line and battle for balls in the box and do all the things that Musovski was doing in this game. You know, maybe the most emblematic play of that was when he goes in for I think it was a Georgie Munungu cross, and he just ends up slamming right into Daniel, the goalkeeper. And it was a foul on Musovski, but whatever. The point was that he was willing to just throw his body out there and sacrifice. And that's sort of what you need a number 9 to do. Yeah. And he is not going to displace Jordan Morris. I don't think in an ideal world, I don't think this is a situation where you got to figure out how to get him and Morris on the field together. This is not that. No. This is like, you just got to get to the point where Jordan is healthy and ready. And then if you can do that, you have enough talent around him where why not? Like if you can get Albert Rusnak and Jesus Ferreira and Christian Roldan and Obed Vargas and Paul Rothrock even, and Alex Roldan to a degree, if you can get them sort of doing the things they need to be doing, Musovski can do a job. He doesn't need to save you. He just needs to, like, put the balls in the net that he should be putting in the net. And frankly, he had a couple of those looks in this game, but he was getting into the spaces.
I don't even know, like, well, obviously he needs to put the ball in the net, more than he has been, but it's the work, right? He needs to do the work to set the preconditions for guys like Rusnak and Ferreira and maybe Rothrock and Georgie to, sort of play the music kind of thing. And that was the big difference half 1 to half 2 for me. To bring it back to Ferreira as a false 9, I do think it can work. And I think it probably eventually will to a degree. It's not going to work with Rusnak underneath, right? Because Rusnak is not going to run as a number 10. And sometimes if you're playing a false 9, you need your number 10 to stretch the field, to read the movement back into the pocket, and then use that defense's inclination to follow the forward against them and sort of burst through the lines and become a point of attack kind of guy. Rusnak has, I don't think, ever done that. And I'm not calling him a lazy player, right? I don't think he's a lazy player. I just don't think that's his skill set. So that is a really awkward fit. Conversely, I do think if you're playing a 1-2, right, with 1 underneath and 2 up top, and the 2 is Musovski and Ferreira, or Morris and Ferreira, and the 1 underneath is Rusnak, I actually think that could work really well, especially if you have 2 flying wingbacks. So I think there's a lot of opportunities here for the coaching staff to figure it out over the course of the next couple of seasons, because these guys are going to be on the team for the next couple of seasons. It just hasn't all happened immediately in the first 6 weeks. And I understand why that's frustrating for Sounders fans, but you're in it for the long haul, folks.
Yeah. You also probably need more like real wingers. I think if you're going to have a false 9, you can't just have everyone can't just be sort of waiting for someone else to push the line. And that wasn't really happening. Just not the personnel that the Sounders have right now. And so there's a variety of reasons. It was funny because someone in the comments asked me, I'm not sure if Rusnak and Ferreira work together in that way. And I sort of dismissed it and said, I don't see why they couldn't. But this game felt like, okay, maybe you're right. Maybe they can't quite do it. And I have to. So
you're eating shit again.
Shit. Yeah, exactly. I'm eating shit again. While we're talking about the top teams in the Western Conference, though, Vancouver got another, they're quietly putting together a really nice run here. I don't know if this week was their most impressive performance, but they're padding enough. Like every week doesn't have to be an impressive performance if they're getting the results. They keep plugging along.
They're playing better ball. It kills me to say it a little bit because I really loved Vanni Sartini, but like it does look like a coaching upgrade has happened in terms of how they're using the ball through central midfield. Like they're up there with Columbus and San Diego in terms of not just possession, but the types of progressive passes that they're hitting, like how they're using that possession. Sebastian Berhalter is among the league leaders in expected assists. Now, granted, a chunk of that is from set pieces because he delivers a great dead ball, but he's actually become like more than just a functional passer from open play. And the fact that they've stayed afloat over these past couple of weeks without Ryan Gauld. If I had said to you, how many points will the Vancouver Whitecaps pick up over 5 games without Ryan Gauld? And I had set the over under at 4.5. Would you have taken the over?
No, I was going to say I would have maybe set the over under at 5, but still that would have just made it easier to go under. But even at 4.5, I think I would have been inclined to go under. I don't think there was any reason to think when, Ryan Gauld felt like such an important part of what this team is.
Yeah.
And it's just proving a more resilient squad than I think we gave him credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly more than I did. I picked them to miss the playoffs. I think I had them in 10th place in the Western Conference. And look, it's a long season, and we've seen good starts fall apart before, but this is like the San Diego thing where it's like if there are red flags, they're not showing in the underlying numbers, and they're not shown by the eye test either. And granted, they did have that loss last week against Chicago, but they were like, that was the international date. The Whitecaps were missing 5 of their top 7 players. I think most MLS teams lose when they're missing 5 of their top 7 players. It feels like a really good team. And as a neutral, they've certainly been one of the most fun teams in the league to watch so far this season.
Well, so far, you and I have both shown a lot of willingness to eat shit, which might just be the theme
part of the job.
Today's part. I am going to go on a limb and guess that maybe you're not quite as ready to eat shit on this team. And that's Austin FC, who, at least by my eye, seems a little more smoke and mirrors than the rest of these teams that we've been talking about, in part because this is a team who was built in the offseason, frankly, to be better offensively, and so far have been one of the worst offensive teams in the league. And somehow, I don't understand. I've been watching these games, and I don't see how it's happening. Somehow they've only given up 3 goals. That does not feel remotely sustainable to me.
So Nico Estevez is a really good defensive coach. We saw that over his first 2 years with FC Dallas, because remember, he took over that FC Dallas team after they had a disastrous defensive season, and then they immediately were one of the better defensive team. I think they were a top 8 defensive team his first year, even though they had a ton of injuries. He never really figured it out in attack with Dallas, even though that team spent a lot of money on questionable but like ostensibly talented players. I kind of suspect that we're going to see the same thing here with Austin. The difference is, so far, he's just being more pragmatic about how he's lining up. Like Dallas, even when they were trying to improve defensively, he never had them full bunker and counter. This first month and a half of the season, Austin is basically not possessing the ball past midfield. They're saying to teams, if you're going to beat us, you're going to have to beat all 11 of us. We're all within 50 yards of the goal. There's no space between our lines. It's, banks of 4. And as soon as you turn it over, we're going to try to counterattack. And we have some guys who can really run. That makes our counterattack pretty dangerous. It is a very good formula to start the season. It's not a formula in MLS that wins things. It's really not. The closest thing to a pure counterattacking side that we've seen win stuff recently in MLS is LAFC, but LAFC definitely have a different club to play, and they've played it pretty well at times in big games. Austin have shown none of that yet. Now, the green light for as opposed to the red flag is that Denny Pereira looked really good yesterday. St. Louis kind of stinks, so take it with a grain of salt. And Owen Wolff has been really, really good this year, like one of the best young players in the league. So if Estevez is able to figure out how to meld that into something that can use the ball, then maybe this thing has legs. This start is more than just them absorbing and countering. Maybe this becomes something where they can be a team that has 45% possession and can play a second club, but is still primarily a counterattacking team. And if that's the case, I think Austin fans will be happy, and I think this team will make the playoffs. But we're stacking ifs now. The other green flag I feel like I should mention here, Brad Stuver is still one of the best goalkeepers in the league. And that, if you're going to be a counterattacking team, have a backstop like that in there, that makes all the difference in the world. And it gives you the margins to figure out the harder stuff upfield while still collecting points.
Yeah, and I guess in their defense, they also have one of the best defenses by XG allowed. So it's not like they are getting lucky, so to speak. They're even underperforming their XG goals a little bit. So I don't know. Maybe I guess I'm just not. I guess I've just been really unimpressed, sort of, with how pragmatic they've been, and it doesn't feel like that was what they were going into this.
I mean, how many
try to do?
How many times did we see Gary Smith teams do this to start the season, where it was like, okay, they're collecting points. They have 6 wins in their first 11, and they've only lost twice. Once it hits summer, they'll really figure it out and build on this. And then they never did. Right. And we're kind of saying that about Nico Estevez's FC Dallas teams as well. So I tend towards skepticism about their ability to spin this into like a season where they're truly contending. But wins are wins, and points count as much in March as they do in September. And I don't think anybody in Austin is complaining all that much about where they are after 5-6 games.
Yeah, so I don't know how many more teams we'll get to today, but I do want to talk about one more, and that is another team who has just decided they don't want the ball. And that is Minnesota United, who has who is averaging 35% possession this season, and yet are just trucking along, getting results and looking pretty decent doing it. Like right now, it almost feels like the teams that don't want the ball are doing, like, if you look at the league losers in possession battle, it's almost all playoff teams. Like, it's all teams that are off to good starts.
Yeah. So it's funny. Well, one thing is that this is the way it always is at the start of the season, right? The teams that play against the ball tend to have better records over the first 2 or 3 months of the season because it's harder to have the ball than to not have the ball. It's harder to create than to destroy, and mistakes are more common as you're sort of knocking the rust off the first couple of months of the season. But in the bigger picture, the weird thing that happened during the first half of this decade is that possession and points per game became completely decoupled in MLS. Right. Like the last half of the 2010s, the high possession teams tended to have more points and to win more trophies. Atlanta, Toronto, the Sounders, even though they weren't as possession heavy as they've become since then, like there was a strong correlation. And then COVID happened and possession became completely decoupled until 2024. And 2024, we saw Miami win the Supporters Shield, heavy possession team. We saw Columbus second, heavy possession team. We saw Sounders among the league leaders in the Western Conference. That's a heavy possession team. We saw the Galaxy win MLS Cup. That's a heavy possession team. I have seen nothing that convinces me that 2025 is going to swing completely in the other direction. That's not to shit on Minnesota United, who have a game model and it works very well for them. But we saw what the Galaxy did to them in the playoffs. We saw what having the ball did to them in the playoffs. I need to see them solve for that before I believe that they are among the elite in this league. I think they're very happy with their start. I love watching Yeboah and Bongi and Tani in the open field. Joaquin Pereira was excellent this week. That's the first time I've said that about him. If he plays at that level, then that elevates them. I still need to see them solve for that against the best teams in the league before I think they've cracked this thing.
Well, I want to. You have time for one more team? I just want to get your thoughts.
Let's do it.
How concerned are you about LA Galaxy? I know you were one of the team. You were, like the theme of the show is eating shit, right? This is one of the teams you were higher on LA going into the season than I think a lot of people were. Are you reconsidering that at this point, or is it like, don't worry about my boys in?
So they were 64-point team last year. And I thought I put their over under at, I think 54.5 or 55.5. So I thought they would drop about 10 points from last year. Drop. Yeah. Man, I undershot that. they might be a 40-point team this year. They might even be under that, because I thought like the theory was that Cerrillo, who's a good player, and their new additions, in the number 8 position, could do enough of the ball progression to let Marco Reus and Gabriel Peck and then eventually Joseph Paintsel do the chance creation. And Paintsel just got back this week, and Reus has basically not showed up. Like, that guy is fully cooked. And so it's all fallen on Gabriel Peck, and it's been too much for him. Like, he just hasn't been able to do the job of essentially 4 different players. And now it obviously hasn't helped that they went out and they got Lucas Sanabria, and he immediately got hurt. And so they've been scrambling to fill the number 8 spot. It really hasn't worked all that well next to Cerrillo. And it just proved to be like too much change year over year from what they were last season. And then on top of that, the real turning point for the Galaxy down the stretch was when Amiro Garces entered the starting lineup to play center back next to Maya Yoshida, because Amiro Garces made it okay for Ricky Puig to fuck up. It made it okay for him to lose the ball in bad spots, because this is the fastest dude in the league. We saw it multiple times against the Sounders when he was actually faster than Jordan Morris on a breakaway.
Yeah.
And that put out the fires. But in terms of defending in the box, Amiro Garces is a freaking disaster. And they're having to defend in the box so much more often this year because their possession sucks. So suddenly this guy who was manna from heaven for the Galaxy, the way they played last year, like, you basically can't even start him in 2025 because he still doesn't know what he's doing in his own 18. So it's just one issue compounding on top of another in this like if you're not a Galaxy fan, it has to be the funniest thing you've ever seen to have them go from winning MLS Cup to being as terrible as they've been in 2025 in almost every way.
Yeah, winning MLS Cup and then doing the entire everyone hated us, look at us now kind of thing.
We back.
I mean, we're back, baby. I mean, I'll tell you, if you really want to enjoy some Schadenfreude, go watch the last episode of Onside and just soak it all in, because it just feels a lot different right now than it did at the time. It's almost... it's pretty sweet. I'm not going to lie. And I actually felt myself appreciating Greg Manny and being like, you know what? I do actually kind of like him. I think he is I think Will Kuntz also very likable. These are likable people. Like, I don't enjoy like seeing them personally suffer, but there is something about them being manifestations of the Galaxy brain and it just sort of exploding. But anyway, that's a good note to end on. Matt, thank you again for doing this. It's been really fun being able to do this sort of like wider takeout. I actually liked today where we just focused on a few teams rather than going through the schedule like we have in the past. But
why don't you get Joe on to maybe pick up the leftovers or something later on in the league? Yeah,
exactly. But of
My
course,
understudy.
people should. Yeah, exactly. So make sure you're reading Matt's must-read column every week. Make sure you're subscribing to his Substack as well. I've enjoyed the Substack. I also love the animations that your doppelganger has been doing on your behalf. Of those, are you seeing these? Are you seeing what the?
I am. It's really incredible stuff. I do not know who runs that account. It might just be a sentient footrest. It's really kind of incredible.
It is kind of incredible. So anyway, I am very much a fan of the Matt Doyle business. So I want people to enjoy that content as well. But anyway, thank you, Matt, for doing this. Maybe we'll talk in a couple weeks if Joe doesn't swoop in.
Let's write it down in pen. I want to keep my spot.
Exactly. Okay, good. All right, well, I am Jeremiah Oshan signing off for Matt Doyle. This is No Sudietis, part of the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, and we will catch you next time.